For the next key address, we have with us the renowned Dr. Senthil Veeraraghavan. He is a professor of operations, information and decisions in Wharton University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Senthil graduated from Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay, and received his PhD from Carnegie Mellon University. His research interests are in the field of empirical operations management, operations analytics, operations management, operations strategy, pricing and revenue management, service operations management, and supply chain management. His research on quality-speed trade-offs in services won the first ever award for Best Paper in Operations published in Management Science. Recently, Dr. Senthil Veeraraghavan advised an undergraduate thesis on a project which received Class of 2018 Penn President Engagement Prize awarded to senior projects designed to make a substantial, sustainable impact in the world. Currently, he teaches operations strategy, for which he has received several Wharton Excellence in Teaching Awards. It's our great honor to have you here with us today, sir. Over to you, please.
Thank you. So it's a deep delight to be here. Sorry about connection issues from my end. I have a bunch of slides to share as we were asked to talk about something current in business. My expertise, as the introduction talked about, was in operations and supply chains. So I'm going to be talking a bit about ongoing problems that are in supply chains right now. So let me start by sharing my slides here. And hopefully you can see this here. And I want to talk about the current ongoing pandemic, global supply chain crunch. I want to keep it open. I have a bunch of data and interesting anecdotes to present about this. But I want to open it up for questions anytime as we go along. I'm told I had 30 minutes, so I plan to talk for about 20 minutes and about 10 minutes of discussion, if that's okay. So again, thank you for the warm welcome. Let me get started with few observations about what has been happening in supply chains in the recent couple of years, especially after the COVID pandemic started. So there were a lot of shortages. If you have been reading news, and of course, there's been a lot of other tragedies, but focusing mainly on supply chains, there's been shortages for everything outside of vaccines, for example. Tapioca, I sometimes joke to my students about shortage of toilet paper, which has very little to do with pandemic itself. Shortage of kettleballs, shortage of shipping containers everywhere. And for everything, we can get in and try to explain what's happening. But I want to show you these shortages are very massive and have disrupted economies all over the world. Particularly in 2022, there's an ongoing crisis of a massive trucker shortage in US, UK, and many of the Western European countries. And there's been high inflation for many countries all over the world. And this has also got to do with supply chain shortages at the same time as trucking shortages. An example company that I'd like to often talk about is during these periods, companies can grow heavily and fall heavily. A classic example of this is a new company called Peloton, and it's very popular in the United States. During the pandemic, they were valued at $1 billion. And in fact, in 2020, US revenues hit $1.18 billion. That's about 400% growth multiple. And if you're thinking about how fast they grew, within a couple of years, they are in doldrums. 2022, they have thousands of unsold inventories. Shares have dropped to like 23% of what they were. And prices of these products were slashed. And And this was a very popular way of exercising indoors for many people in the United States. Pretty high price for this equipment, about $1,500 on the bike and $39 monthly subscription. So they were exploding growth, and suddenly they're all gone. And they have a ton of bikes now. They're trying to sell the bikes. There's just not enough. The question is, what's happening with all of this, right? And so I want to talk about something called the bullwhip. Why do companies go up and down like this, especially during pandemics and heavy crunch periods? And what does it mean for India? So hopefully I'm able to connect to a bunch of topics, talk about global supply chains, and I will connect to this concept. This idea is called bullwhip. So I want to start off with physics, having engineering background, like many of you. When you crack a whip, you hear this sound, and it's a sonic boom actually. That's because even when you give a flick to your wrist when you're using the whip, the tip of the whip actually travels many hundreds of meters during the same period when you're giving it a flick, that it travels faster than sound. It breaks the sound barrier. In fact, fastest whip is 2.5 times faster than sound. And you can hear a sonic boom. In fact, it's the same sonic boom principle that you see in Concorde flights and so on. Anyway, this is called the crack of the whip. And the crack you hear is because how fast the tip travels compared to your handle. Now, supply chains are pretty much like this. What's happening is, since supply chains have gotten global and very big, very disconnected, it's almost like a whip. You think of it like a very flexible, long chain that has many parts where it can be flexible. So I like to show this picture sometimes. It's a very simplistic picture, but a very good schematic picture that tells how a little bit of variability at the customer level can go up to be a big variability at retail level, distributor level. It expands much more at the factory level, tier one supplier level. It's a big up and down boom. You can see this. And the equipment manufacturer sees a huge bust and a huge boom. And the whole thing travels back again, and so forth and so on. So the question is a fairly simple, predictable variability at the customer level can get very messy and can get multiplied many times. And this is what's happening to many companies, and very similar to what's called the bullwhip. So I want to show you what happened in the 90s and bring it back to what's happening currently. Late 90s, somebody started making these observations in HP, and they recorded this, and they said, look, actual HP growth was the dotted line that I'm showing you here. The actual sales are increasing, but the orders were up and down multiple times. So what's happening is, even though sales are growing in a very steady way, the orders are much more volatile. Now you say, well, maybe this is like what's happening at HP. They made mistakes. Maybe it's an internal company problem. This is not a global supply chain problem, particularly. Let me show you another example and then go on to further examples related to Peloton. This is Procter & Gamble. So Procter & Gamble, now think of Procter & Gamble sells this diapers for babies. And babies, we all know, babies are basically born throughout the year. I mean, there is like a high level of predictability when babies are born. And you look at consumer level sales, it's pretty flat. And you look at the retail orders to the wholesalers, it's showing some ups and downs. And you look at the wholesale orders, it goes down to 0 and then goes like to 15. So I descaled all of these numbers just to show you just the idea of the concept. And you look at the manufacturer orders, there are basically no orders for a long time. And then there are huge orders, and then it goes down to 0 again. So this volatility is basically increasing as you go up the supply chain. So why does this matter, right? So suppose you're a company like 3M. You're a smaller company. You're manufacturing like adhesives, chemical adhesives for these diapers, and you're getting orders from P&G, and you're seeing no orders for like 6 months, and suddenly there is a huge order, couple of months, and then there is no orders again. This makes no sense, right? When you think about the actual number of babies that are being born through the year, that's pretty flat. So what's happening here is basically there's many levels in the supply chain. The communication of the data is not transferred in a smooth way from level to level. So we can say, well, this is failure of communication. So there are lots of consequences of this. And you ask, oh, well, why can't we just, we are living in a data rich world. We can share data easily. Data is available everywhere. Why can't we just be able to transfer this data up the chain and solve this problem, right? So there's a lot of problems related, because if you don't share this data across levels, you have excess inventory, like what I was talking about for Peloton. You have unreliable supply, like the driver shortage, poor customer service. If you're an e-commerce company, you have very low utilization of labor and warehouses. So that's a problem. And then you end up with high transportation costs. So there are lots of consequences, but I want to talk about why they're happening. So there's actually, I don't want to touch upon all the reasons due to lack of time. What we have is basically three big concepts that I want to touch upon. There's a lot of forward buying going on in the market. People plan ahead and you buy ahead. You say, well, I know there is going to be a shutdown coming, lockdown, for instance, and I have cash in my company to buy something. So I put in a large order because I know I'm going to be able to sell it for the next 6 months, right? I mean, this is forward buying. Sometimes this is overreactive, and sometimes it's reasonably reactive. Sometimes it's overreactive. There is a lot of shortage gaming. Now, why does all of this happen, given that data is actually available everywhere? We can share data, but the main reason is every level has its own company, has its own people, has its own decision makers. And what I'm going to show you in the next couple of slides is actually this has gotten very global. So I showed you a picture of just a set of boxes, but let me show you a global map of how a typical computer, PC, or a Apple laptop supply chain looks, right? So if you want to think about manufacturing that Apple goes through, right? I mean, so just for the smartphones in this instance, for example. If you buy an Apple, it always says designed in California. So of course, there's designing in California that's going on. There's licenses from Europe that comes in. There's a lot of mining that's done in the United States. There's a lot of mining that's done in South Korea that comes in. And then the actual equipment manufacturing is in United States, Japan, and Europe, Ireland. So there's a variety of equipment design and manufacturing going on. The actual product manufacturing happens in China, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, and Malaysia. So in fact, TSMC makes about 90% of the chips that are going into any laptop. And between Samsung and TSMC, they pretty much cover the smartphone industry. So what's happening now is you can now imagine supply chains really handled not by one vertically integrated company, but many companies and many countries. And each country has its own interest in growing a supply chain, has its own political considerations, has its own economic considerations. And that creates a lot of tension, and you can see the tension building up. And in fact, any of us who've been reading newspapers every day know that we are living in interesting times now. And I want to show you two factors of this interesting time. One is, of course, the global uncertainty that happens because of geopolitical tension that you're seeing today in yesterday's news and so on. But if you look at the timeline of last 10 to 15 years, China-US tensions have essentially grown and spread globally. And we know that there's tensions between United States and China, there's tensions between China and India, there's tensions between China and many other countries, definitely tensions between Taiwan and China. So if you look at the global trade that the United States and China does, China is the largest export market for about 27 countries, and the United States is about 24 countries. So there are a lot of countries that are actually heavily dependent on a supply chain perspective on both the United States and China. And um, when they have both political and economic tensions, it creates and deflates supply chains. That's been happening at a very heightened sensitive level. So why is this? Why is this? Of course, this is a problem. How can we think about this problem going forward, right? So let me show you a couple of slides of data and help us think about solving this problem. So this is a favorite slide of mine, which I actually show to my MBA students every year, and I add data every year and keep showing them, which is wage growth in China. So in 2010, you went and bought something in China. The early wage in China was around 30,000 yuan renminbi, and that's actually tripled now. So just in 10 years. So we're talking about wages tripling in 10 years. And why is this happening? You can ask, I mean, of course, the inflation happens in any country. Why is this happening in China? Actually, two big reasons. Again, lack of time, but let me give you the two big reasons. One is because a lot of children in China go to school, and the high school graduation rates and the college graduation rates are highest in the world. So when kids graduate out of college, when they graduate out of high school at high percentages, they want to go into jobs that are actually very well paying, and mostly they're entrepreneurial jobs or working in managerial jobs. And that's created labor supply constraints on how much manufacturing can happen in China. The second problem is because there is a heavy urbanization that has happened on the coastal regions, they want to move this pressure into the interior regions. And that's actually related to some of the tensions that's going on in Xinjiang and other regions, as you have heard of. And that's the second reason why this has happened. Essentially, what this has caused is a lot of supply chains to actually move gradually out of China. Let me show you some data that's happening in the last couple of years. Many actual locations for supply chains have moved out into Southeast Asia. An example of a country that's gained tremendously from this is Malaysia, Japan, and Pakistan. Also, Bangladesh has gained a lot when it comes to apparel retail. There's been estimations about how much India can gain and so on. So this is essentially the opportunity that's opened up because of economic tensions and heavy wage growth that's happened on a secular basis. So based on this data, you can actually make three kind of suggestions for opportunity, paths of opportunity in India. I want to just stop off there and wrap this up. So since supply chains have become global and essentially distributed across many countries, there is a great value in building manufacturing and special economic zones. This is fairly clear idea that's been exploited in Shenzhen. But there's a good reason that this could be done in Indian economy. The second thing I often talk about in my class is the role of culture and systems. Education creates a high level of opportunity, and this is actually a great example of doing this talk and many people going to ISME and getting an education. You think of this as an opportunity to think about how we create a population that has good higher education and vocational training. And the third opportunity that is actually excellently proved out by a lot of data that I can show you in Shenzhen is how to cultivate both engineering and management expertise. There's a lot of push towards engineering for sure in India, but there is tremendous amount of research that's recently showing that when you have mid-level managers running companies, the management expertise actually leads to substantial multiplication of both productivity and profits. So those are the 3 points I just want to leave with. I'm happy to take questions or comments that you have, and I'm happy to share more data. Thank you. I'm at Wharton. I know that the introduction went on, so it's a tremendously great place. Anybody who's visiting us are welcome to visit Wharton, and I'm happy to always collaborate and exchange ideas and so on. So it's a pleasure to be here and chat with you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Senthil, for a very insightful talk. And I'm sure there are questions here. Before there are questions, I would like to add value from my side. So some key takeaways which I took from your presentation is about the global shortage. While may not be a new phenomenon, but what we see is an exaggerated form of global shortage. Geopolitical factors came in, disrupted the supply chain. You talked about the bullwhip effect, which I think people would have studied in their operations courses, but some things have become more prominent today in the post-COVID world. I would like to add and maybe plug in our next panel discussion that importance of forecasting suddenly gets enhanced in such volatile scenarios. And you ended with opportunities for India, and we have the future of India sitting here in the room. So there are lots of opportunities. Government is focused on Make in India. The supply chains, because of geopolitical issues, are becoming more contracted. We have seen Vedantu and Qualcomm getting into a joint venture to work on semiconductors. Another number which shocked me was that 80% of the iPhones sold in 2021 were made in India or assembled in India. So that increases opportunities for Indians, but also which means that new skills you need to acquire to make full of these opportunities. So that was my takeaways. Thank you again. But we'll take some questions. I think there's a question in chat box. Dr. Senthil, if you can access the chat box. Or...
Yeah, I saw a question from Moses Pinto. Can inventory costs be strategically designed to improve sustainability and improve brand perception of the revenues? Actually, one of the things that I did not touch upon at all is to talk about ESG kind of effects in supply chain. So there's a tremendous opportunity to improve supply chains through sustainability. So one of the things that we have realized in the recent years is many companies have gone a little bit too far on volumes of production. And so of low quality production that's happening, that is also not sustainable products. They are very hard to get rid of. They're not recyclable and they're not reusable and things like that. And there are actually firms both in the United States and some firms that I'm working with that are focused on actually creating a value improvement for customers who really care about sustainability. So think of the organic food movement. Organic food movement created a huge impact on how restaurants and groceries do business, and also improved their profits and created high value for customers. And that's a very similar aspect that's happening here. One of the things that very quickly that I want to note in the United States that's grown is a large number of companies like McDonald's and Burger King and all these companies that used to sell thousands and millions and billions of beef patties have essentially pushed far into creating vegan and organic foods, for example. And that's actually picked up. There's something called Impossible Foods, which is a set of companies that have essentially created products that are very, very similar in texture and structure, and they have become quite popular. So there's many opportunities here, actually. That's one of the areas that I'm very hopeful about, although I did not talk about that in this talk.
Thanks, Dr. Senthil, for taking that question. Any other questions from the audience? Nitin? You have a question?
Thank you, Senthil, for the wonderful presentation. I was a little surprised to look at the data with regard to the bullwhip effect, especially given the fact now with IT systems,
Yeah.
information should be pretty transparent across the chain. And
Yeah.
IT systems have really ended up maturing now with
Yeah.
not just within the company, but across the chain. But why is it that
Yeah.
it still continues?
Yeah, I think essentially we have solved the data. No, I wouldn't venture to say we have solved the data side of the problem. We have made tremendous amounts of progress into solving the data visibility problems, which is a forecasting thing. It's like really important to forecast well. Companies that have done well have forecasted well, and so on. So why does this problem still persist even after that? And in fact, during the pandemic, why has it exploded? We solved the information problem better, but we haven't solved the incentive problem as well. The incentive problem is if you have a value chain, there are many partners in the value chain, and each partner in the value chain have their own profit maximization or revenue maximization or their own goals that are going on. And sometimes these goals are not aligned. And so it's a question of goal alignment. And of course, when it involves different countries and different governments, this is off the scale, right? I mean, even with memorandum of agreements between governments, allocating special capacities and rules that can increase the ability to do ease of business and so on, we still have some problems because of incentive misalignment. So a lot of this is actually incentive misalignment. The data is there. There's no, for example, incentive to share the data sometimes.
Dr. Senthil, just to add, is that the reason why many companies are more moving towards D2C as a model to address these incentives?
Yeah, so D2C is a great fit for these kind of things, right? If you think of direct to consumer, if that's the question,
Yes.
is direct to consumer models, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So direct to consumer models, actually, people love to say we cut out the middleman, and this is literally true in the case of D2C models, where if you're so I work with a company that, for example, sells women's apparels, gets them back, and they are able to predict to a high degree of selling clothes for women who are working in professional companies and work also need like comfort wear at home. And this is actually highly hard to a difficult problem to forecast at the individual level. When you're a DTC company, you get this data back literally. You are able to actually see what their choices were, and you're able to cut through all the clunk about having a manufacturer who is able to do this. So Zara is Zara, Mango, H&M. I work with HK Retail, a Hong Kong retail enterprise, which actually does a lot of visibility effort into trying to understand how your consumers are perceiving the product, so you can directly design and make those products instead of putting an order 6 months ahead of time, getting it to the store, putting it in the store, finding out, oh, it didn't sell. All of this is gone. You directly get data, and you can make it in small volumes. You have to be nimble enough, though. So yeah, DTC is a move that's helped a lot.
Any other question? Yes, Dr. Ravi. So there's one more question from Dr. Ravi.
Oh, sure. Questions are my favorite part, actually. I mean, I tend to talk through and then take questions. Anyway.
Yeah. Very nice to hear all the things you've spoken about, Mr. Senthil, Dr. Senthil. Now, I was just wondering, now we studied a lot of JET and how JET would be useful and things that about JET, all the great things about JET. Now, I was just wondering, what would be the future of JET post-pandemic? Will still companies want to practice JET, or will they look for a second alternative to JET?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's actually I like to say, people like to say that I know very little about everything. Particularly, I'm very, very bad at predicting the future. I'm better at predicting the past, right? In the past, what's happened is um, many companies have tried to implement JIT in their JIT is JIT is just-in-time systems. It's a misnomer a little bit, and all of us know this, right? I mean, it's not about just having zero inventories, but having the right amount of inventories at the right place and having the right amount of control. But what has happened in the United States, at least over the last 20 years, is because there has been a big push towards outsourcing. A lot of talent in building products has actually gone away. So whenever we talk about, so one of the companies that I like to talk about is a company called Stride, and Stride makes a little mechanic motor that sits in your shoes, and so you go running. You can measure cadence of how fast you run. So if you're like a pro athlete or running a marathon, you can actually test a lot of things about your wattage consumption, running consumption, and so on. So just a little bit of background on the company. So they make this device. There's actually nobody in California would actually design this device and make this device and manufacture this device and scale it and sell it. So they have to go to Shenzhen. So one of the stories about JIT implementation has been a bit of a mixed bag for the United States is because of massive amounts of outsourcing that has happened. So a lot of companies are now trying to push back, at least in the United States, to get some jobs back, including Peloton, and trying to implement JIT as it supposedly is implemented in Japan. You go to Japan, you see the workers on the line, they stop the line, they pull the hand-on carts, they're able to fix the problems right away and solve the problems and have just enough time and just enough inventory to make things. So it's been a skill that sort of is lost. So my own prediction is push towards JIT will actually increase. People are saying now, oh, JIT is the cause of all these problems. It would actually go away, but I actually say the opposite. I see more push towards JIT because understanding how our systems works is actually going to be a very important component for knowledge for industries. How do you make things, and the know-how is actually the most important part of JIT.
Thank you, Dr. Senthil. Any other question? Okay, I think with this we'll conclude, and I'll invite Nitin to give you a vote of thanks, Dr. Senthil. Thanks a lot again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senthil, for your time. Actually, I wanted to especially come right now to be able to reflect on our journey together. As Senthil has been, like, we have literally grown up together. He was with me at IIT Bombay. We had consecutive room numbers, consecutive roll numbers, and we have seen through a lot of things. I think what I most remember is the fact that we used to just have this psychological, because we had consecutive roll numbers, we were almost in all assignments together. And it was a war between the two of us as to who will do the assignment. So it's 12 o'clock in the night, 12:30 in the night. I'm hanging out in his room. He's hanging out in my room. And eventually he used to give up and he used to do the assignment. I used to be sleeping on his side. So it's been a journey. He went to Carnegie Mellon immediately after that. I was in the US for 3 years. I joined Carnegie Mellon for my MBA. We again graduated together. He with his PhD, I with my MBA, and Senthil went on to do great things in Wharton. So as I was sitting there, I was thinking these around 23 plus years have been kind to us. I think we have really come quite far and looking forward for continued friendship. What I also feel that this is just an amazing time when you can involve so many people who have achieved great things from across the world. With the pandemic, it has taught us a lot of things. It has certainly also brought the ecosystem together to be able to bring someone from Australia and immediately after that, someone from California. And also, I think Senthil is in California right now, but from the US immediately after that, and people with that pedigree and that knowledge. So thanks a lot, Senthil. You are a close friend, and thanks for your time. It gives us a template to involve you and many others in such kind of knowledge building sessions. I'm sure everyone out here and everyone who's online and beyond that, these sessions are being recorded. They will be really, really useful. Thanks,
Yeah.
buddy.
It is always a pleasure. Thank you so much, Nitin, for inviting me, and I'm happy to share my time. So thank you, everyone. I'll leave now, but have a great day at the conference, and hopefully we'll meet online or offline somewhere, and more days in person. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, everyone. Now we'll have a 10-minute break, and let us all be back for the panel discussion by 11:35.